We begin at 4 with breaking news. The family of Stephen Jones speaking out today alongside civil rights attorney Ben Crump. Channel 3's Stephanie Simone is on the First Alert desk with the latest. Stephanie.
Kara, that's right. The Ben Crump law firm joined the Jones family and the NAACP this afternoon to talk about the changes they want to see from Hartford police. Late last month, Hartford police officer Joseph McNano shot and killed 55-year-old Stephen Jones. Jones was carrying a knife during an apparent mental health crisis. Now, attorney Ben Crump wants to get answers for his family. He says they are looking for accountability and demanding changes when it comes to how police handle mental health calls.
Her brother Stevie was a good person. He was beloved by their family, beloved by the community. He never got in trouble, had no criminal history, and she's going to tell you that she called because he hadn't taken his medicine after she was notified by his nurse. That's the only reason she called 911. And she was calling for the ambulance. She wasn't calling for the police.
And I'm Mike Heidick. The mayor says the actions of that officer did not meet the standards for the department.
Now his fellow officers are calling for him to get his job back.
NBC Connecticut's Matt Austin is live in Hartford with reaction tonight. Matt?
Yeah, so Mike and Keisha, the mayor says he fired the officer during his probationary period because he fell short of professional standards. But the police union fired back, calling the mayor a coward and warned there could be some dark times coming for the city.
Firing one police officer is not justice. We have one more to go.
Today, protesters calling for more police accountability following Hartford Mayor Runan Arlampalan firing the police officer who shot and killed a man last month. Several officers had been dealing with a man reportedly holding a knife and dealing with a mental health crisis on Blue Hills Avenue.
Drop the knife!
Officer Joseph Magnano arrived later, and as the man approached him, ordered him to drop the knife and then shot 9 times.
Officer Magnano came in, sirens blazing. He came in and from the video appears to have re-escalated the situation and made it worse.
A funeral was held yesterday for the man who died, Stephen Jones. Among those who attended was the Reverend Al Sharpton, who today applauded the officer's termination. Previously, Magnano had been on paid administrative leave. On Monday, protesters interrupted the mayor's State of the City address to call for the firing of Officer Magnano and a second officer who shot and killed another man last month. The police union worries about the signal the firing will send to people thinking about becoming officers in the city, and they're also calling for the officer to be reinstated.
This was a tragedy of justice and process. Our mayor caved to political pressure. He is a coward. He is devoid of any semblance of leadership or manhood. There are dark times coming.
Now, Attorney Crump called the firing an important step toward accountability, but they are still pressing for answers and changes. A town hall about public safety is scheduled with the mayor at the library behind us at 6:30.
To all units, proceed to your post assignments. All units, proceed to your post assignments.
That's the sound of the police. Whoop, whoop. That's the sound of the beast.
Yeah, baby. It's episode 25 of Probable Cause on March 31st, 2026. Or is it a meeting of the Hair Club for Men? It's hard to tell which. I'll tell you one thing that it's not is the Ben Crump fan club. All right, it's Probable Cause. And this is Jeff Norman and Greg Dillon with you as we always are on Tuesday nights. And tonight we have two very special guests to discuss the same topic. And we lucked out. They were both available and we have them together. James Rakowski is the president of the Hartford Police Union, also is, I believe, a sergeant with the Hartford Police Department. Is that correct?
A lieutenant, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I saw in the media sergeant. Didn't I see that?
They get it wrong all the time.
Oh, okay. All right. So I didn't make it up, at least. Okay.
No.
So thank you for clarifying. And Von Kleem is the president and director of consulting for Force Science. He's a nationally recognized expert in use of force and constitutional policing with over 30 years of experience in the criminal justice system. He's also a licensed lawyer. So maybe he'll represent you, James, when the mayor sues you for defamation after you said he's devoid of manhood. I bet he can prove that he's a man. I'm not sure, but we'll see. Anyway, thanks for joining us tonight. How's everybody?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks for having me tonight. I appreciate it.
Well, same here. This, Greg, we've been dealing with various controversies. Last week we had Afro Man's attorney on. We addressed the Minneapolis shootings, but this is right in your backyard, pretty much.
It is. It is. I worked for a number of years in the Hartford area when I was working fugitives and when I was working gangs. So although I think I probably timed out before I got to meet James, but my retirement was in 2009, so I've been out of the game for a while. But I'm sure the lieutenant and I know a lot of the same people in the system still.
Right.
I'm sure.
Well, I hope that we can look at this in at least two different ways. One being, what determines whether or not the shooting was lawful, but then separate from that is, could there be perhaps better techniques, better policing? I assume everybody would agree that the goal is to neutralize the threat, if possible, without killing somebody. So I hope that we can get into looking at it in both ways. Maybe, James, you since you're there, right there in Hartford, you can set the stage for us, and for the benefit of people watching who may not be familiar with the story, kind of summarize it for us.
Absolutely. There was a mental health crisis call that came in that there was a man with a knife that had hurt himself, and his sister had called into the police requesting help. Officers were dispatched. First officer on scene attempted to tase Mr. Jones unsuccessfully. That was about 7 times. Mr. Jones then began to chase the second arriving officer on scene. And then the third officer arrived on scene. They kind of created a semicircle around Mr. Jones. The scene wasn't contained. And then Officer Magnano arrived on scene, approached Mr. Jones, gave him verbal commands to drop the knife. Mr. Jones appeared to turn towards him and become fixated and walked towards Officer Magnano. I think it was 40 steps that he took towards him as Officer Magnano retreated. Officer Magnano continued to give him verbal commands. And as the space became condensed, Officer Magnano gave him a final warning and then discharged his firearm to stop the threat.
And James, I'm sorry, Jeff, but my understanding is Stephen Jones was given 62 commands to drop the knife. Is that about correct?
Yes, 62 commands from us. And I don't know if those included the citizens that were there also, but I'm assuming if it's commands, there were 62 commands issued from those 4 officers combined.
Yeah.
How long did the entire encounter go on for? It seemed like it was kind of a long time.
I believe the encounter from the first officer arriving to Officer Magnano getting on scene was a total of 7 minutes.
Okay, I thought it was even longer. It was difficult to pick which footage would make sense. I mean, Vaughn did a great commentary, but that's too long to insert into the show. But there's a lot of different body cam footage and there's cell phone footage. So I hope I picked footage that at least will help us as we discuss it. One of the officers was a female. I think all the others were male. And let's take a look at her body cam footage.
Drop the knife. Drop the knife. Craig, just back up. Drop the knife. Just drop the knife. 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 Craig, just back up a little bit. Drop the knife. Drop the knife. Drop the knife. Drop the knife. Craig, just back up, back up, back up. Craig. Drop the knife. Stevie, you gotta drop the knife. We do not want to shoot you. Just drop the knife. Drop the knife. Drop the knife, hon. Drop the knife. Drop the knife. Honey, you gotta drop the knife. You gotta drop the knife. Still hasn't let go of the knife. Drop the knife. Drop the knife, hon. Back up, hon. Just back up a little bit. Stevie, you gotta drop the knife. You gotta drop the knife. You gotta drop it, honey.
Let's pause it there for a moment. I like how she's calling him Stevie, honey, hun. I mean, it's trying to be relatable. That makes sense. Who's the guy off to the left? I mean, she told one of her, I see a uniformed officer, and she cautioned him that he was getting too close. And maybe, Vaughn, you can explain the significance of that when it comes to assessing how they all perceived it as a threat. But who's the guy to the left? Is that a plainclothes cop or just a bystander that she said move over to the left?
My understanding is it might have been his brother, and I'm not positive, but it was a bystander.
Because isn't it unusual that police in a situation like that would let somebody get so close without shooing them away?
Your focus is on the subject, and sometimes people do enter that arena and you're not even aware of it until they've hit your kind of peripheral vision, because we don't have additional officers out there to actually maintain this. And that's kind of what the community was saying, that this was contained, and it wasn't. You know, Stevie walked wherever Stevie wanted to go, and the community was coming in and out of the area, of the threat area, consistently.
Right. She shooed him away in kind of a friendly way, so that's why I'm kind of wondering. He may not have been just any bystander, but all right, let's go.
Knife. Drop the knife, hon. Back up, hon. Just back up a little bit. Stevie, you gotta drop the knife. You gotta drop the knife. You gotta drop it, honey. Drop it, hon. Drop it. It's not that, hon, we don't have to do that stuff. Can we, do we have another taser?
Okay, can you drop it for me, Steve?
Do we have anyone else with a taser?
Steve, can you drop it? Come in. What's going on with you?
Honey, you gotta drop the knife.
Drop it. Just drop it so we can help you. You got a big knife in there. You gotta drop it so we can help you.
Please just drop the knife, hon.
All right, Steve? Steve, you're okay. We're gonna make sure you're okay.
Hey, drop the knife. Drop the
Is this
knife.
Officer Magnano now?
No, drop the knife.
Yes.
Drop the knife. Drop the knife. Drop the knife. Drop the knife. Woman, you're gonna get shot. Drop the knife. Drop the knife. Drop the knife. Drop it. Last time. Drop the knife. Drop it.
Okay, so I let that go quite a while. That's kind of a long clip to play in a podcast, but I thought it would be good for context to people to get a sense of the situation. What did we see in that situation? What's relevant? How do you guys assess it?
Well, let me start with something that we didn't see there that becomes probably one of the most relevant pieces. Is he looks like he's very slow. He looks like they have plenty of time to walk backwards to create distance. He doesn't look like he's going to be able to get to them very quickly. And that's a reasonable thing to assume if you hadn't seen the previous video. When he gets tased, he moves very quickly. He sprints very quickly. He turns very athletically. And then he continues to run around the car and chase the officer at more of a run. It would, if you just watch this, you think this guy has no mobility. And that's going to, a lot of the people viewing this are going to think, well, they could have just walked backwards. There was no rush. The fact that when an officer shows up, one of the things you reasonably infer when you're talking about opportunity, like if this guy chooses to attack me, am I at a distance where he can get to me, is just a time, distance, speed assessment. And it's just an educated guess with every individual. And so in this case, a lot of people watching this are going to assume, well, from a time, distance, speed, he doesn't have much speed. He can't move very quickly. That's simply not the case. And so for an officer who says, well, I inferred from looking at him that he's upright, he's mobile, he's armed, his lack of following orders and maintaining possession of the knife, shows that he has the intent or willingness to use the knife. He's not discarding it in the face of uniformed officers. He has the physical ability to do it because he's upright, he's mobile, he's still gripping it. He has the means itself, which is the knife. So he has the means of inflicting death or serious bodily injury. And so the final question was, does he have the opportunity, which is a time, distance, speed assessment. And that's just an educated guess. And so if you reasonably infer that he can get to me at this distance, if he chooses to, evidence of how reasonable that inference is to go back and watch the other body cameras, because that man absolutely could sprint and he absolutely could be athletic if he chose to be, and spin and turn and run. That wasn't portrayed in that. So those audience members who are watching that understand we have the benefit of having seen that previous body camera.
Yeah, I wish I had that footage. Like I said, I was a little bit worried about whether or not I selected, what would be the most relevant. What's the story on tasing? I guess sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And not all the officers had taser guns. Does it matter how many? Like, let's say, for example, I don't know, maybe you guys know, he was tased maybe once or twice. Might it have worked if he was tased a whole bunch of times?
So the new Taser 10 is a different type of weapon. It actually has 10 cartridges in it, and you have to shoot one cartridge or one taser out and then shoot another one so there's connectivity between the two probes. They discharged 7 probes into Mr. Jones, and they were ineffective. Now, that could have been due to clothing. It could have been done to not having enough of distance, but he did spin out of the wire. And those tools, or you want to call them a weapon, are voluntary. Like, I don't carry one because they have not worked well for me, and I don't like providing an opportunity to a suspect of 2 to 3 seconds while I have to assess whether or not it actually worked.
Yeah, and I would add to that, when you're facing a lethal threat, and this can't be lost on your audience because it's being lost in this national discussion, is when you're facing a lethal threat like somebody who's armed with a knife, when an officer brings an intermediate force option, something like a taser, that is less than deadly force. The law doesn't require you to use lower levels of force against a higher threat level. The police as a profession and individual agencies or individual officers might voluntarily assume the risk of trying a taser. They are voluntarily assuming that risk to reduce the number of people that they could lawfully shoot. When that's being done, typically the tactics you'll see across the country is, if you're going to choose to assume the risk, which every officer has the right to, it's a discretionary tactic, you do it with lethal coverage, meaning somebody next to you has a gun while you attempt the taser, precisely for what James is talking about, is if it doesn't work, right? If this guy starts to rush at you and you don't get the second probe, or you don't get an effective probe spread, or it's just ineffective because of clothing, right? You don't actually get the connectivity, as he says, or complete the circuit for neuromuscular incapacitation, then you have to have somebody who's willing to use deadly force. But these tactics have been adopted by police agencies, again, to reduce the number of people they could otherwise lawfully shoot. And so what's now, when you do that, there's sort of this creep, like, well, other people have tried it, and so now we expect officers to try it. It's discretionary, and it is a massive assumption of risk, and there's no law that requires officers to try to respond to lethal threats with intermediate force options.
Right. Well, I don't know that anybody's claiming there's a law, but I mean, I think that the average person would want to see if there's a way to restrain him without killing him. But what makes this shooting lawful, and how close to the line of unlawful was it? What would be the factors to consider?
Well, if you're looking at, one, lawfulness is anybody in my position wouldn't conclude lawful or unlawful without actually analyzing the case, seeing the officer's statements. You guys may have more access to it than I do. We, as a general principle, we never look at a video and give a final conclusion like that. But so here's what I'll say. Here's the questions we're asking relative to what officers are trained to consider in doing an imminent threat analysis, so that ultimately a trier of fact, a chief of police, internal affairs, or a jury can make that determination of reasonable or not. The first thing is that the officer is evaluating an imminent threat, right? In order for him to be privileged to use deadly force, he has to be facing an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury. And imminent does not mean immediate. Imminent means there's a course of conduct going on that if they don't interrupt that course of conduct, it's reasonable to believe that somebody's going to be seriously hurt or killed. One of the formats for that analysis, there's several out there. These are not legal formats, but they've been decades and decades of use in both police and civilian cases. One's called the ability, opportunity, jeopardy. It's the imminent threat triad. Others break that out into intent or willingness, ability, physical ability, means, and opportunity. And so what that means is, does the officer have a reason to believe this person has the intent or willingness to inflict death or serious bodily injury? Do they have the physical ability to do that? Do they have the means, whether it's their fist, their teeth, their head, or a knife or a gun? And then do they have the opportunity, meaning if they choose to inflict death or serious bodily injury, can they get to you before you can effectively respond to it? In this case, what officers are trained to look at is, certainly, I don't think there's any question whether the guy has the means to inflict death or serious bodily injury. The knife itself is it's beyond debate capable of inflicting death or serious bodily injury. The guy's upright and mobile. Does he have the physical ability? Well, the video demonstrated the quickness with which he could move. He was maintaining consciousness, maintaining the grip on the knife that is consistent with an assaultive use, right? So I don't think anybody's going to seriously contest whether it's reasonable to believe. Now, again, you don't prove any of this beyond a reasonable doubt. When you're at the scene, it's just a probable cause standard. Is it reasonable to believe he has the ability, the means? And I don't think there's any question about that just from watching this video and observing that conduct. The willingness or the intent is hard, unless somebody gives you the express intent, I'm going to kill you. And so you almost always have to infer intent based on the circumstances surrounding the conduct. And intent it's intent or willingness. So what makes that difficult in cases of mental health issues or mental crisis is because they may not know what they're doing, right? We don't know what their motive is. And, maybe a simple oversimplification is, if this guy thinks you're a piñata and he's stabbing you to get candy out, it doesn't matter. It's reasonable to believe he's posing an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury. A lot of times we look at mental health issues, and we just saw with Attorney Crump, he's laying out that he was a nice guy. He was a great family man. He was a great brother. All those things I will just assume are absolutely true. He was not shot for being a bad guy. He was not shot for being a bad husband, a bad brother, a bad son. He was shot because the officer believed that he posed an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury, and that he needed to stop that threat, right? And that's why they shoot. So that's intent, ability, and means, or willingness, ability, and means. The final one in that imminent threat analysis that allows an officer to be privileged to use deadly force is opportunity, meaning if he chooses to initiate that assault, if he chooses to attack the officers for whatever reason, can he get there and that's a time, distance, speed issue. When we look at human performance issues, time, distance, and speed, we remember that there isn't a universal response time. There's not a universal sprint time, but every officer out there has to be given a starting point. They have to be given, it's sort of an educated guess based on how far that guy is. Can he get to me? And we sort of start with an average of 15 feet a second, right? And to just go half that. I mean, it's not going to be precise, but there isn't a universal response time. So at 7 feet, you're talking about half a second he can get to you. When you're watching that video, what officers are trained to consider is, and you saw it in the video, you need to back up a little bit. They were expressing their recognition of time, distance, and speed. There was a couple of things that made me realize some of these officers were not recognizing time, distance, speed, because they were standing way too close for them to be able to effectively respond with a quality of force that would immediately and decisively stop the threat. Guns were down at some points, and other times they were up in a low ready position. All of these are just tactics, and they're fine. Officers get discretion on their tactics. When we looked at some of those tactics, I look for not just the officer that shot, but what were the other officers doing that made it clear they also recognized the threat? Well, one, they had their guns out. Why is your gun out if you don't recognize this guy as a potential threat of death or serious bodily injury? Why are you telling your back officers to back up? Well, because you recognize that at that distance, he's posing a threat of death or serious bodily injury. Why are you telling the civilians to back up? All of that was evidence that not just the officer who fired, but all the other officers also recognized this threat. Now,
yeah, that's a good rebuttal, because a lot of the grief that the police are getting from members of the public is that, well, why did only Officer Magnano feel it was necessary to shoot? That's what the public, a segment of the public has been saying. And you're saying, well, maybe they didn't shoot, but they certainly perceived the threat, so they weren't that far off in terms of their perception.
Well, there's a couple of things. I was in the military, and we sat in a meeting one time debating whether we should give medals for restraint, medals for not shooting people. And I just asked a simple question, was how do you recognize tactical incompetence, unconscious naivety, like you just don't see the threat because you haven't been experienced enough to recognize the threat, and those who are restrained and disciplined in a voluntary assumption of risk, because officers do that all the time, especially with people in mental health crisis. But it's an objective test. Objectively, every one of those officers was in danger of being stabbed anytime he decided to stab them, to the degree they were within 15 feet of him. And even 15 feet would have been too close relative. And I can talk about that a little bit later about it's not just the distance he is, because the starting point for them to respond to that threat with a quality of force that would immediately and decisively stop it, which in this case would be a firearm. The starting point for when you start that stopwatch is when the individual officer perceives the movement and perceives the intent behind the movement. Basically, when they recognize they're being attacked. That's not at 15 feet. That's usually several steps towards the officer, which has now cut down the response time, where what our fear is, and this is why we don't ever train officers to stand that close to a potential knife attack. The fear is that guy will be on them faster than they can even get the gun back up. And to make that point as clear as possible, we've done studies where we've had officers with their guns out already in a high ready position. And with an audible go signal, they would raise the gun and aim fire one time. And that was about 0.86 seconds. From the audible signal, about 0.86 seconds. So you have to ask yourself, if that's how long it takes me to recognize a simple stimulus in a lab setting, how much more difficult is that going to be in a real world operating environment where you're paying attention to, now imagine the female officer for a second, when she has to have her focus of attention pulled over to the civilian, and she's talking nicely and she's doing non-escalation, some de-escalation, not really de-escalation because Mr. Jones didn't appear escalated, so you're going to hear a lot of, they should have de-escalated. Well, he wasn't escalated. He appeared to be very calm in those moments. But non-escalation, is part of that conversation of yourself, of your partners, of the citizens, and of course of Mr. Jones. But when she's doing that, which she was doing a great job of, it forces her to task switch, or what we might refer to as multitask, right? She's having to look over here. Could you imagine when she looks over here and then looks back and he's already taken those 4 steps towards her? Her response time has been crushed down to nothing at that point. Mm-hmm. So all of these things.
If I could just interrupt for a second,
of course, yeah.
I noticed that the officer with the beard that was to the side of him, not only was far too close distance-wise, but she was getting concerned that he was too close, and if Jones had actually lunged at him, she would have been hesitant to probably fire her weapon, because already the distance is far too close to guarantee you're not going to be in a crossfire situation. So I mean, it was sort of a double whammy there when he got so close that he could have been injured and he could have prevented other officers from discharging their weapon.
Yeah, you're precisely right, and I that's an important thing. Again, I call it what cops know, right? Things that the civilians watching this aren't probably thinking about, but what cops are trained to consider. It was crossfire. If you are effectively limiting my response options, if you choose to close with that guy and start grappling him, okay, well, my gun's out of play now, right? Mm-hmm. Or if you stand so close and you're not grappling him, but you let him close the distance, well, you've effectively taken the gun out.
Yep.
The other thing was, and James brought this up, this was not containment. Containment requires somebody to be limited to a reasonable area of movement, and reasonable area of movement is dictated by, are they a threat to other government interests or not? Or are they impeding our tactical advantage? So reasonable means, it's tactical reasonableness in that, and it's easy. This case lays it out perfectly. If he stops right here in front of this abandoned house, for example, I will say, as long as he's willing to stay right there, I've got a good backstop. I can create space. I might get some barriers in there. As long as he stays there, and there's not an imminent threat to government interest, he's not increasing his tactical advantage and decreasing ours, then I have what's called discretionary time. So for us, that's containment and control. When I have discretionary time, then I can engage in communication, de-escalation, persuasion. What this was not containment, it was a mobile surveillance platform is what it was, right? There, as James pointed out, they're letting him dictate where he goes and when he goes there. And they're trying to maintain some distance. Whether that would be effective distance or not, that's their judgment. We can do a time, distance, speed analysis and show him that if he decides to attack you from there, your response options are going to be very limited. But once he starts to move, all of a sudden now our shooting background changes, our crossfire situation changes. We start entering open intersections. We start getting closer to civilians. We start getting closer to vehicles in the street during cross traffic. And all of those things decrease the officer's tactical advantage, and they no longer get to dictate the time and location of any enforcement action. So this was not containment as police understand containment. This was at best a mobile surveillance platform. And I'll just make this point as well. Tactics are discretionary. That officer who stood within 5 feet or whatever it was, videos are liars. So we don't use videos for time, distance, speed, or angles. The video has to be interrogated, and then we compare the video to forensic evidence, and then we can start dictating time. But what I can do is say on average that vehicle lane is probably 12 feet on average. So if he's half the distance of the vehicle lane, then he's probably 7 feet, right? Or 6 feet. Yep. But whatever it is, it was very close. But that's his tactical choice to make. And all tactics are based on risk, benefits, and trade-offs.
We have a question from a member of the audience about tactics, actually. Do you want to finish that thought, and then we'll get to
Yeah, let me finish this, because people might want to criticize the officer for having his gun down, standing too close with his gun down. Okay, there's some risks in doing that. Your response time is gone pretty low, unless you're going to shoot from the hip and you're willing to assume the risk of getting stabbed in the process. Those are your risks to assume. But from a de-escalation and non-escalation standpoint, they might be considering, well, if I point my gun at them, there's a risk of escalation. Some people will de-escalate when you point their gun at them. Other ones will escalate, and you don't know which one you have. Dealing with people in mental crisis means you're dealing with someone that may have disorganized thinking, right? They're not rational. The things that might work for you and I because we're mad is going to be very different. The things that work for you and I because we're afraid of getting caught and put in jail might be very different. You can have a rational conversation where you explain what I stand to gain, you explain what I stand to lose, and that might be persuasive. But when you're dealing with someone who has disorganized thinking, right? So we call it the TEB model. We look at their thoughts and whether they have disorganized thinking or not, their emotions, whether they're calm or whether they're highly aroused, and then their behaviors. Well, the biggest indicators of disorganized thinking are the responses consistent with the communication? Like, are they responding in a way that's consistent with the message you're sending? Or are they just continuing to walk around saying nothing to you, which would be evidence of disorganized thinking? And then behavior, are they compliant or not? In this case, there was a lot of evidence consistent with disorganized thinking, which I think they're going to agree because they're trying to push the idea, and probably rightfully so, that he was in a mental health crisis. And then his behavior was consistent with failure to comply. So all of those things might lead the officer to be like, well, I don't want to make things worse. I don't want to point my gun at him. And I know that's risky, but it's his risk to take is the point.
Okay, well, we need to hear from James as to how the union is going to be fighting this. But very quickly, a member of the audience is asking about whether or not it might have been better for just one officer to speak to him. And, instead of just being a Monday morning quarterback about that, let me expand that question and ask, is this the type of thing that the police are trained in? I mean, aside from hostage negotiators who have a special skill, but the average police officer, are they trained in it, or is it just more or less an improvised situation when they're doing this?
I'll answer that. We're trained to have one voice, but if you look at that, there were multiple people talking in this scenario, and he wasn't responding to any of them. So normally in that, somebody is keyed on, like that person's going to be able to develop that rapport. There is no one able to penetrate that. Like, I teach de-escalation, and society thinks that, I'm going to hit you with a pygmy dart and you're going to be de-escalated and everything's going to be great. If you're in crisis, I need two things from you. I'm providing the opportunity for de-escalation, but I have to have conversation, because I can walk you from the emotional part of your brain and find what puts you there, so we can go into logic and work that through so we can get you help. And then after I have that first tangent, which is the conversation, the agreement, the next tangent is participation. I need you to drop the bat. I need you to drop the pipe. I need you to drop the gun, the knife. So I could be having the first tangent of communication, which is the agreement part of it. Like, okay, we're going to talk. But if you're still walking at me and we're having a conversation and you're not dropping the weapon, or you're not participating in wanting to de-escalate the situation, then it doesn't exist. People make that mistake that we do it to them. We're not Jedi's. We're not, Jedi mind trick. Oh, that's not the droid you want. Absolutely not. And some people make that mistake, and Vaughn was talking about it. Just because he's moving slow doesn't mean there is a low risk. People are associating that slow pace with low risk. It doesn't exist. And it is. I would have liked to seen Stevie, Mr. Jones, key on one person during that initial conversation with the three officers. At the end, he clearly keyed on Officer Magnano.
Yeah, I think you guys agreed the female officer had a nice touch.
Yes.
You guys are the professionals. Would you evaluate her as having a nice touch? A nice touch meaning both the way she talked to him and that she was aware of the surroundings. I mean,
it was a very non-threatening approach, and she was trying to almost mother him to a degree by using the word honey and Stevie and stuff. Yeah.
We had people yelling. We had people talking calmly to him. He was non-responsive to any of it. None of those conversations that they tried to begin with just a simple engagement. Drop the knife. Please drop the knife. He could have responded, I don't want to drop the knife. Are you scared? There's plenty of things that could have been done. And again, someone's in crisis. It's a different level. But that first engagement of a conversation was never big. We were never able to initiate it. So there isn't de-escalation. It's not us doing it. We provide the opportunity for it, and it just didn't exist in this.
I think that's brilliant. What your audience needs to understand is there's been a big push for police to engage with mental health professionals in these areas. So we did a research 5 years ago. We said, okay, well, what would they do different? And the shortcut is the nurses and the people who work in psychiatric wards and the mental health professionals, they got their best practices. They did a study called BETA, Best Emergency Treatment of Agitation, best practices for the emergency treatment of agitation. Why is that important? Because they got their best practices from watching police, first of all. Second of all, they said in their reports after they did extensive studies that not everybody's able or willing to be de-escalated, which is what James is talking about. A lot of people think that if you use the magic incantation, say the exact words, that they're going to be de-escalated, they're going to be cooperative. And so that police, whenever they use force instead of de-escalating, that's a choice by the police. If only they would have de-escalated, they wouldn't have had to use force. And just precisely right. We evaluate these cases because we know the opposing experts will come in and say, had they talked nicer, had they talked differently in some way but in this case, they did all of them. Now, the answer to the one, and they were ineffective. So you have evidence of that. The one voice thing is great. Yeah, officers want to use one voice, but there's some flexibility in that if that civilian comes over and all of a sudden you realize he's answering them, then you stop talking and let the guy talk. if it's being effective and he can do it from a safe distance. Those who are looking at it, I love the de-escalation conversation, but we look at the 5 C's of de-escalation. It's containment and control, which we talked about. Then it's contact, which is psychological contact, which in this case, it didn't appear any of them could establish. And it's also physical contact. Does he hear the words coming out of your mouth? And it's containment, control, contact, and then communication. And communication is, do you have the skill set? Have you learned to de-escalate? How do you learn to do feeling reflections and empathy? And do you understand the difference between using de-escalation techniques from someone who is in an emotional aroused state versus somebody who is in mental crisis and has disorganized thinking? Because they're very different options. And when you have discretionary time, you can do what James just described perfectly, right? That's when it's safe and there's not an imminent threat to government interest. But the 5th C is cooperation. So it's containment, control, contact, communication, and cooperation. And if you don't have those, you cannot set the conditions that allow the other person to de-escalate. Now, audience needs to also know de-escalation is often used when you mean communicate. De-escalation is also used when you mean persuade, right? Those are very different skills. And these officers were using a lot of really great de-escalation tactics and communication tactics and non-arousal or non-escalation tactics. They were sometimes using them all at the same time, and we saw that. But you're precisely right. A lot of what the female officer was doing falls well within good, reasonable police non-escalation tactics. They were not effective, and you can tell they tried conversation, they tried compassionate voices, conversational voices, they tried aggressive verbal commands. None of that was effective in getting him to actually cooperate.
Yeah. James, I want to kind of switch gears a little bit because of the time. Can you set the stage for our listeners or viewers as to how this played out, meaning that there's an Inspector General's investigation that is being conducted right now. The officer's probation, I believe, was supposed to end on this past Monday, right? This last Monday, this week?
It ended on Friday, I think the same day he was terminated. No, I think it would either the 28th or the 27th. So he was either terminated the day before, the day of.
Okay. I read reports he was terminated on a Friday and his probation would have ended on that Monday. But regardless, if you could just kind of set the stage, because people may not be familiar with what happened since, which is that just within hours, basically, of him completing his probation, the mayor overrode the police chief and decided to terminate his employment before the Inspector General's investigation has been concluded. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Because I think, many people would find that quite interesting that the mayor sort of, not sort of, that he sort of got in front of his skis and decided to terminate before an investigation was concluded.
There are a lot of administrative. So we have 3 silos in this case. We have the possible criminal aspect, Inspector General's investigation. You have our own collective bargaining agreement, which is the administrative guidelines that we've agreed to with the city, due process and officers and members' rights. And then you have the civil wrongful termination suit. Now we're proceeding on the administrative end because we believe that there were a lot of missteps by the mayor in the city in this, and that will help build ultimately. We can't have Officer Magnano's job reinstated through that administrative series. That will do it through the civil side. And then we still have the IG's investigation.
Any indication when that will be concluded?
Historically, they're anywhere from 10 to 12 months. Now, we do have elections coming up for the mayor. We do have elections coming up for the governor. So maybe the mayor wants it done earlier, and maybe the governor wants it done later with the influence of Al Sharpton in his office.
Yeah, we didn't have time to show that clip, but that would have been also something of interest, I think, to the people.
Yeah, there's so much going on with this case.
So
if you guys can hang in there a bit, we got some questions from the audience. Two people have asked about why the police aren't trained to shoot in the legs. I'm an idiot. Can I just make a guess as an idiot before you guys give the answer? I would guess because it's not very easy to hit the leg, and then there's the risk of the bullets then landing somewhere else. Did I guess correctly or not?
Or into somewhere else.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
Right. So think that you have your femoral artery in your leg. If I hit you and I rupture your femoral artery, you got about a minute and 30 seconds with your 6.6 liters of blood pumping out. You're dead. Center mass, we are trained to shoot center mass, the highest probability of you living, because our job is to stop the threat. Stop the threat. Center mass. Arm, how if I miss your arm? That's not good. So you're correct. There are reasons we are trained to do what we do. I'm sure Von's got a spin on it also with why that center mass is important.
Well, Jeff, just from my standpoint, I mean, my training has been that even people that are very, very proficient with a handgun and have years of experience in a high-stress situation can fire 6 rounds and maybe put one on the target if they're lucky. Because of the tension, the stress, the person's moving, you may be moving backwards. It's not a guaranteed shot. So to expect someone with a handgun to be able to strike someone in the leg and stop them, it's unrealistic, and it doesn't bear discussion, really.
Well, no, we have your heart rate's over 150, 160, fine motor skills go, gross motor skills kick in. There's a lot of things that happen to the body that the general public is not aware of in these situations.
That reminds me of like these high-speed chases. You hear these people who say, well, when the cops are chasing somebody, why don't they just shoot out the tires? It's like, I don't know anything about guns, but I know that doesn't seem too easy.
The state of Connecticut forbids it, so.
Well, there's another easier thing, too. Even the people who consistently testify against the police have made this point, which is the legal justification for the use of deadly force, whether you shoot him in the leg or you shoot him center mass, is the exact same. If shooting him in the leg is lawful, shooting him center mass is lawful. Now, if you are in some circumstance that you think you can safely shoot somebody in the leg and immediately and decisively stop the threat, there's nothing in the law that says you're not allowed to do that, but there's also nothing in the medical literature that says you're not going to kill them in the process. So the people imagining shoot them in the leg are imagining they're not going to die if you shoot them in the leg, or that it'd be easier to save their lives. The doctors we've talked to have said that's just simply not true. You can't predict that.
It contradicts the training academy.
Yeah.
Everything you learn in the training academy at the firearms range is only center masses. There's never a target where they're trying to get you to shoot arms and legs.
Right. And so Chief Detmer, a while back, former president of IACP, I think, he got a lot of slack because he was training his officers on the range to shoot legs. But his point was, you're not required to do this. If you find the circumstances where it makes sense to do this, then we want you trained to do it. But people were misquoting him that he was trying to shift the standard. The biggest risk was that he would reset the bar of public expectations, that the officers who chose to shoot somebody in the leg were somehow more compassionate than and had a higher value of the sanctity of life than those who shoot center mass. They're both deadly force, and they're both capable of killing you. And by the way, lots and lots of people are shot center mass that do not die, right? Lots and lots of people are shot in the leg that do. It is an imagination that shooting someone in the leg is going to be like on Hollywood, where it's merely a flesh wound. They throw a bandage on and they go back to chasing bad guys. So that, I mean, yeah, we don't train them that they have to shoot in the leg, and even if they do, they can still likely die.
James, I've never seen a target when I was on the range, and I was on 3 different SWAT teams, where I saw a target that went below the hips.
No.
Yeah, it's clearly not the training, right? Somerville John in South Carolina wants to know why an ambulance wasn't on the scene. And I heard Ben Crump say that the family called and they wanted an ambulance. They didn't really want the police to show up. But so I guess there's a couple of questions in there. Does the operator who answers a 911 call have the discretion to choose which it is? We're both called, or what? Can you guys?
I don't know when and again, it's an assumption on my part, but I can go to the overall dispatching etiquette is they could have sent an ambulance, and what priority is that? Where's the ambulance staged? How far is it coming from? And then you sit down there and go, okay, we need to get them up lights and sirens, because if it's just a mental health call crisis, we're not going to really go lights and sirens. When it begins to elevate into that situation of an officer involved shooting, you know someone shot, absolutely lights and sirens. But in the same context, the fire department, ambulance, and our mental health professionals are not going on scene. Everybody's going, where are the mental health professionals? They're not coming into a lethal arena. They're not doing that. Everybody would stage. I can't tell you how many calls that I've been on where the fire department parks up on the corner, ambulance is on the corner, mental health professionals on the corner, because somebody said they wanted to hurt themselves. Okay, and they will not enter the arena until we give the all clear that the scene is safe. That scene wasn't safe. Nobody would have been there. The scene wasn't contained. It was evolving. Everybody kept moving. They're not entering that.
But what actually happened in this situation? Was there an ambulance like a block away waiting on the scene, or did the ambulance not get called until after the shooting?
I don't know. Okay. I know that it was there pretty quickly after Mr. Jones was stopped.
Yeah, and it's a great question, because from a strategic response protocol, lots and lots of agencies will have that ambulance stage blocks away or whatever, or stay at the station house if it's within blocks. That's where they are staging, right? But don't be mistaken, had an ambulance been right on the scene, there still would have been calls for accountability for the shot. Had he been shot in the leg, there still would have been calls for accountability. This idea that had they just shot him in the leg, everybody would agree it was a legally justified shooting. Had they only had an ambulance staging, everybody would agree this was a reasonable, legally justified shooting, and as demonstrated by the ambulance. Those are all tangential issues relative to the response strategies, but they almost become red herrings. Like we're going to try to decide how could we have made this a more perfect response after the fact. Every single tactical response can be improved after the fact. That is the reality of the real world of policing. And so we do this, and this is what we would refer to as a tactical after action review, right? An AAR. And every time we do an AAR, we have this conversation. Well, you know what? Ambulance took about 5 minutes to get there. Had we had them staging, we could have cut down to about 2.5. That might have been helpful. We don't know if it would have been, but it's something to consider next time. If we can do that without increasing risk to the officers or to the suspect. The other thing is, all the different tactics that were used. Maybe we created more space. Maybe we blocked off the intersections. All those things. There are going to be plenty of experts coming in now and doing a tactical after action review, and then trying to convince the community and then later a jury that if only the officers had done something different, they could have avoided this outcome. That is 100% speculation. They just make it up as they go along. It's always all of the things that they recommend always inure to the benefit of the suspect, and they never imagine that had they done a different tactic, things would have been even worse. And the law doesn't even allow us to evaluate these cases through the lens of 20/20 hindsight, because then we're impacted by what all of us are impacted, which is outcome bias. We know the answer. Right. And then it's this creeping determinism where once we know the answer, when we go back and evaluate it, we imagine it was much clearer than it actually was in real time. And you'll start to hear some of these experts say, well, this was predictably counterproductive. I don't know what legal standard that is, but that we frequently hear that in hindsight, when they know the outcome, they say, well, it was predictably counterproductive.
Yeah. I think we've done a good job separating what the law allows, what's permissible versus how things possibly could be improved. And I have one idea I want to ask you guys, and let me preface this by saying, because I don't want you to get the impression that I'm insensitive to how dangerous it is for the officers. I was stabbed in a random street robbery very severely. I almost died. I was in the hospital for 5 days, 2.5 days in intensive care. The doctor held his two fingers together like this, and he said, he missed your heart by this much. You would have been a goner. So, you know, I understand how dangerous and scary it is. So, nonetheless, I have a suggestion. And this, I guess, what made me think of this is what I've seen in police raids where they go in with battering rams and shields and so forth. What about some kind of shields? If you have a whole bunch of officers on the scene, could they not have overpowered him and protected themselves from being stabbed if they were holding shields in front of them?
Jeff, I'm just going to say only because, I mean, like in jails or prisons, you know, they have squads that are equipped with the see-through shields or shields that have electric probes on the outside, and they can subdue. In inner city like Hartford, you could have 10 of the cars with shields, and if every one of those cars is tied up on a call or you know, out of commission for whatever reason, you could still have 5 officers show up and none of them have shields at this point. I mean, and you can't be a mobile, you know, SWAT wagon where you have, you know, ballistic shields and you have tear gas and you have.
There's a limit to how much equipment the average cop can carry around.
Exactly. I mean, you have to be somewhat realistic with the budget and with the amount of space in the cruisers that they're going to be carrying what they can carry, but you can't equip every car for every possible contingency.
Right. Do you guys agree that if they had shields, that might be something that could be? And again, I'm not Monday morning quarterbacking. I'm just talking about how possibly it could be done effectively in the future.
I'm not entering that arena with with a shield. It's not happening.
Well, think about the ones in the prisons too, Greg. You brought up a great point. They also wear puncture-resistant gloves, arms, chest, legs,
and they're in a confined space all the time.
Mask, and they do that because they know they are preparing for the number one threat in that place, which is going to be the shank. It's going to be the improvised edged weapon, and so they do anticipate that because they have their stationary supply closet right there, right? And they have their teams that have been trained to contain somebody. And it already, keep this in mind, a lot of those places, there's already 3 points of containment.
Yes.
You just get a team to figure out the 4th point.
Yep.
So I've not seen that. I've not seen that anywhere in the United States. And that would be bringing, again, I know what you're doing now is just like, we all want to imagine, okay, we've learned lessons here. How can we avoid having to shoot somebody in the next issue? Let's war game it. That's what Axon does with the taser. That's what companies do, is try to figure out how we can safely contain or arrest people without having to shoot them. That technology is not there yet, and we saw that with the failure of the taser. And so we can do that. It's a tactical after action review. It's sort of like, how do we get innovative? How can we get creative?
Right.
But here's the thing, and James is smart for not jumping into this. We see cases where they're like, well, they could have brought a drone. And I'd go, well, does your department have a drone? Well, no. Okay, well, they could have done shields. Well, does your department have shields? And have you trained to do that? No. Why? And we're talking about it here because you caveated it pretty well. You're like, look, you fight with the army you have, not the one you wish you had. Right. And you fight with the army of today, not the one you may have tomorrow. So those are important.
Well, that's why I said I'm not Monday morning quarterback.
People see videos of these, you know, gadgets where they fire a net over somebody and they're like, oh, that's effective. And then they have, you know, the less than lethal beanbag round or rubber bullet or pepper balls. And yeah, those are all great things, but every department can't afford to man every single officer with every one of these gadgets and train them. I mean, it's just not realistic at some point.
Think of this, and this has been brought up a couple times. People are like, well, why didn't he just hit him with the car? Okay. And what happens when Mr. Jones falls on a knife and kills himself? What do we do then? Because the first thing that I'm going to be sitting down, if that was me and I'm in a courtroom, is they're going to look at me and go, Lieutenant, yes, were you trained to hit people with a car? Were you trained in the academy? Have you been certified in, motor vehicle use to stop a lethal threat? There's no winning in that situation.
Right.
So it is.
It would be deadly force again. Yeah, I mean, we're all getting to the same place. Shooting in the leg is deadly force. Shooting center mass, deadly force. Running somebody over the car is deadly force. The legal justification is the same. Going back to Jeff's point is okay, but if we shift from that for a second and look at in the universe of possibilities, how creative can we be so that the next time we might have some more tools at our discretion? Okay, in this case, they did try intermediate force options. They did try to not have to shoot this man. What they lacked when that final decision to shoot was he was mobile, he was not contained, he remained an imminent threat. And while any one of those officers could assume whatever risk they wanted to assume on their own behalf, once he starts getting to open intersections, closing distance with civilians, you are now deferring that risk to the civilians who you are there to stand between the risk and the civilian. And instead they could be like, well, let's back up, guys. Well, this guy's mobile, right? Backing up would have saved them, but it wouldn't have protected all the other government interests like the civilians who are at stake or at risk. So coming back to fighting with the armor you also have to understand that there was time limitations that were dictated by the suspect because he remained mobile. They didn't necessarily have the time. Even if they would have had those resources, they have to have sufficient containment to implement those resources. So it's a good exercise to do after action reviews. I just don't want the audience or the community to start to imagine that this should have been done in advance and therefore they're negligent for not having done it. I mean, one of the questions would be, why don't all the officers have tasers? So they all could have tried them. I just came off a jury trial where one of the jurors asked, while the suspect was trying to stab another officer, the officer used beanbag rounds. And then the beanbag rounds didn't work, so he went to a taser. The taser didn't work, and so he went to his firearm. And he was indicted, and the jurors found him guilty because in one of the jurors' evaluations, they did a tactical after action review. They said we would have tried different tactics, and therefore his tactics he did we find to be negligent. So they convicted him of negligent homicide because they just thought he should have tried a different taser. They just thought he should have waited for another option. Now, this is while the guy's actively trying to stab an officer. Time reduces options. But we have experts out there trying to convince our jurors and our community members that they get to step into the role of the police officer, watch a video, make decisions from an air-conditioned courtroom or the air-conditioned office, and then use their judgment as a proxy for the officers. And if they decide, I would have done something different, they get to hold the officer criminally accountable. And we've had that happen in cases where an officer went to prison after that. And we understand why he went to prison because we interviewed the jurors. So it's terrifying. That's why I get very careful. And I think James is right to be very careful about engaging in the timing of looping this conversation in with an active case, because it gets people to start imagining, yeah, they could have done that. And that's a dangerous game to play.
Yeah. And don't listen to me. The fact that I wound up in the hospital is an indication you shouldn't listen to me. Let me tell you what happened, by the way. Hold that thought, Greg. A 15-year-old kid on a bike rode by me while I was walking on the street in downtown Long Beach. He gets off his bike and he pulls out a knife and he says, "Give me your wallet." So I thought that if I fought him off and yelled for help simultaneously, he wouldn't want to get caught and he'd run away and I'd get out of it that way. Turns out he didn't care at all that I was screaming for help, and I didn't win the fight at all. I didn't have any gun, any self-defense skills at all, and I got stabbed like 10 times. Most of them were minor, but like 2 or 3 of them were pretty severe. So I'm in the hospital in the emergency room being worked on, and the police show up. Turns out right after the kid did that to me, he robbed 2 other people in the exact same way, right in the same neighborhood, while the police were swarming the neighborhood looking for him because of what happened to me. Not very bright. So after the 3rd time, they caught him, and they took him into the emergency room while they were working on me, and they said, "You want to identify him?" So I said, "Sure." So they turned the lights off. They shined a flashlight on him. He was wearing a red jacket. By the way, if you ever want to rob somebody, don't wear a red jacket because it makes it very easy to be identified. So I said, "Yes, that's him." So the cops handed the doctor, he says, "How much money was in your wallet?" I said, "I think about $40. So the cops gave $40 to the doctor to hold for me. No sticky fingers in Long Beach. So anyway, I'm in for 5 days, and then about a week later, I'm walking down the street, and I see a whole bunch of cops at the exact same spot where I was stabbed. So I'm thinking, what is going on with this location? Is it cursed or something? I figure I gotta ask what happened, and I figured if I tell them, you know, I was the guy who got stabbed, they probably all heard about it because it was 3 people, which was very unusual. So they'd probably answer my question instead of saying none of your business, go away. So I just picked out one of the cops sitting in a car, and I said, oh, do you happen to know about this incident? He goes, know about it? Those were my guys. He said, and I'm surprised, and he's talking about the third time. He goes, I'm surprised they didn't put holes in that kid. And like, I'm the victim, and I'm thinking like, oh my God, that sounds a little aggressive. But now that I've heard what you guys are saying, I guess, and of course I didn't witness what happened with the third encounter, but I said to him, well, why do you say that? And he says, because if he got away from them, it would have been on them that he then harmed another person. So who's to say whether or not it was, you know, it might have been lawful to shoot him or not? I don't know. But anyway, they got him, and he was convicted of attempted murder.
I think you got to, when you go back through what these cops are thinking, it's a, you know, I like to phrase it as what cops know. There was a series of books when I first became a cop, right before I became a cop, and I read them all because I wanted to know how cops thought. They were all nonfiction, just stories of cops on the job. One was titled Night Shift, and one was Day Shift, and one was Detectives, but they were all very short stories of cops. And I wanted to immerse myself into the reality of what cops were facing. And it always reminded me that cops know things that civilians don't know. Now, if you grow up in inner city and you grow up in a culture of violence, you're going to know an awful lot of things that cops know as well. And fair enough. I love them on our jurors. But most people who are most curious about these cases and hold some of the strongest opinions have no idea about the uncertainty of violence, the unpredictability of violence, and the permanence of violence. And so when you look at knife attacks, as both a prosecutor and as a cop, I've seen, you know, those little tiny paring knives kill people with a single stab right through the heart, and you never see it coming. I've worked cases now where people are in fist fights. They win the fist fight. They walk about 10 feet away and lay down and die because they didn't realize it was a knife fight. And they were stabbed even once during that one time. The guy was stabbed one time during a fist fight. He won the fist fight, actually stood up and yelled at the guy, and then turned around and died in front of his wife and daughter. So we see what a knife of all sizes can do. They'll say, well, it's just a little knife. Don't care. They're sharp. They will kill you. And there's plenty of YouTube videos now. There's no excuse for pretending that a knife can't kill you in the most unpredictable ways or give you serious and permanent life-ending injuries. And so this is what cops know. And so it's not funny to cops. It's not cute to deal with people with knives. And you don't have to reload knives. And they come at you from many, many weird angles that you don't necessarily defend against. And so I think that's part of it. And it's part of what audience members who are watching is like, well, they could just disarm him. Well, there's been plenty of people who've tried to disarm people and been sliced, stabbed, or killed in the process. And I'll make this final point. We had one of our jury foremen who just decided on a case, and again, she gave a media interview afterwards. And I make sure every cop I teach now at conferences know this. The jury foreman says, and I'll paraphrase it, that the suspect's life was more important than the officer's. So she did not care if it was her. She would have let that officer get slashed every single time before she would have shot that suspect. And this was a quote that came in the paper from her interview. I'm like, that's who's on your juries. Yeah. That's who does not understand, or maybe understands the reality of violence and doesn't care, right? So this is part of trying to educate the jury or educate the community is understand the reality of the violence. But that's not even the last hurdle. The last hurdle is to get them to care and understand that the police are put in these situations to assume risk on behalf of the community. And so it's not just their personal, but it's not just the agency as agents of the state, right? They're not just agents of the city or agents of the state, but they also have personal agency that they have to protect against. And they have a right to defend themselves on both counts as agents of the state and as in their personal agency. And whether you think their life is worth more or less than the suspects, that's the person who's using force's judgment to make, not ours in hindsight.
Yeah, Vaughn, I had, that reminds me, I had a online discussion with apparently a woman who sided with suspects, and she said, well, you're being paid to risk your life. And my response was, we're being paid to risk our lives, not sacrifice our lives. I said, and there's a big difference. James, I just want to follow up before we conclude. What is the current status, just to kind of wrap things up for the people that are watching this and don't have a great grasp of the whole thing? I understand officer is terminated, and what recourse now does he have in that regard?
Again, there's the three silos. I mean, the criminal silo, if he is arrested for manslaughter, that's going to be 10, 12 months down the road. But right now we're pursuing the administrative violations of our collective bargaining agreement. And if those prove successful, we hope to have him reinstated. If not, then the next avenue would be a civil wrongful termination suit.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
That could be a long road.
It is. We're honestly, gentlemen, probably 3, 4, 6 years down the road before complete resolution to all these, because the court system just moves slowly.
He'll be getting a ton of back pay.
Yes.
Yes, but before the back pay comes, you're predicting it will come. Let's say it will. But before that happens, does the union give financial support, or is Officer Magnano on his own?
He's on his own. We're going to support him through the endeavors of attorneys, but he is going to have to try to make ends meet with getting another job right now.
Right. All right. Well, I think we pretty much covered it. Greg, should we do what happened to Greg, or do you think we should wrap it up and save it for next week?
I'd push it forward to next week, I think. Yeah, I don't want to make anything take away from the impact of the podcast.
Okay, fair enough. We have a segment, just so you guys know what we're talking about, called What Happened to Greg, and we show videos of different police encounters and just basically talk about it and see if anything like that ever happened to Greg. But I kind of feel like we're complete.
Yeah.
You guys, anything else you guys want to say?
No, I truly appreciate your time and the opportunity.
All right, let's make sure that people know how to find you. There is an X page for Force Science, at Force Science. Hey, that makes sense. And there is a website, forcescience.com.
The Force Science News, which you can access from forcescience.com, sign up. It's free. I've written about a lot of these issues well before this case happened to sort of outline exactly what the opposing side's arguments are going to be. Mm-hmm. Also, for those of you who are on LinkedIn, that's the only social media I have right now is LinkedIn. So find me at Von Kleem. It's Kliem, Von Kleem on LinkedIn, and let's get connected. And then you guys can stay ahead of some of the articles and stuff I'm pushing out.
Okay.
Great articles.
And there is the website for the Hartford Police Union.
Thank you.
hpdunion.org. Thank you, Lieutenant Rakowski. Sorry, I said Sergeant before.
It's all right. It's just a title. Everybody gets bent around. I'm like, nah, it's just a title. It doesn't mean nothing.
All right. All right. Thanks to our beloved audience. Thank you, Vaughn. Thank you, Greg. And join us tomorrow night, Wednesday night, for Ask the Inspector. Scott Ritter is back from Russia. We'll be on at 7 Eastern time, our usual time. And then Thursday night, the Whiners, also at 7. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, guys.